Is there anything you would have done differently?
We reported a true story.
Our colleague Brian Williams is back in Kuwait City tonight after a close call in the skies over Iraq.
Controversial Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh and questions about Kavanaugh's drinking in the past.
Sean Hannity, come on up, Sean Hannity.
Today, Andrew Cuomo is having a moment.
Hi, I'm Chris Stirewalt.
And I'm Eliana Johnson.
And this is the final countdown edition of Ink-Stained Wretches, where we will break down what's going wrong and what's going right with the American news media here on the eve of Election Day.
That's right.
It's true.
But Chris,
it's
right,
accurate.
it's right and true. But Chris, before we get to our front page today, I was just paging through the Washington Post the other day. Just kidding, because I don't read that paper. However,
you quit when they wouldn't endorse Kamala Harris.
Yeah, exactly. However, there is a wonderful profile of you in the paper that was published 2 days ago, written by Jeremy Barr, that we should talk about. And the best part of the profile is that the photograph of you included in it, you look very skinny, and you're not even wearing a garbage truck vest. You didn't even need to put on a neon vest.
A penny. Well, what I do look like, and my Jessica teases me that I look like Fraser Crane and the Kelsey Grammer's character. And I'm like, I don't know. And then occasionally I see a picture like that and I go, oh yeah, okay. I guess there's worse things to look like as an old dude. But yes, it was a very nice of them to do. And I really appreciate it. But I do think that it legitimately points to the biggest media story right now and the biggest media story of next week, which is how in the HE double hockey sticks are these networks, mine included, going to manage calling these races. And it's to be boring, we only have one office that is elected by the whole nation, but it's not elected in one election, it's elected in 51 elections. And people don't want to wait until the 11th of December or whatever, when the Electoral College, when everything's certified and the electors vote. So 60 years ago, we fell into the convention of networks doing this work. And I think it is fair to say, given what happened in 2020, that role is very much in doubt in some people's minds. And so there has been, I've done a lot of interviews promoting News Nation's coverage because there's a lot of questions about, like, what's going to happen this time? Is it going to work this time?
Great. So the headline of this piece is, will TV viewers trust network election calls? Chris Stirewalt hopes so. Stirewalt helped explain Fox News' 2020 calls. Now he's political editor for News Nation, an upstart cable news channel. So talk us through the piece a little bit and what your view on networks calling elections is.
Well, so you know how it works, but maybe some listeners don't, which is that these networks retain experts for every 2 years. They hire consultants who, some are Republicans, some are Democrats, some are academics, and they put together these nerd tanks, the nerdquariums, where they do the work. And that's the norm, because obviously you don't need a bunch of data scientists on your payroll the whole time. So they're contractors. And there's a pleasant fiction arose in network news, which is that we are calling it, the network is calling it, but it's really the network's consultants are doing that work. And, I was at Fox for 11 years and, I have some expertise in these things, but most of my expertise is about who lives where and how do they vote. I can't build an algorithm. I can't do the technical work that is necessary, but basically what I'm good at, if you'll permit me, is I know political history and I know political geography. and demography. So when you get down to, okay, well, there's this many votes out, we think, in this county, and there's this many, what do we expect to see? How confident? So I'm like checking the work of the data people against real world knowledge and experience. And what News Nation is doing this year is we are being transparent about that, basically. DDHQ, which is the competitor to the Associated Press for data stream on election night, they also have forecast models that are based on completed research surveys. The way that election calls go is you do a bunch of polling, and then you have your completed survey. Then you have targeted precincts where you look for vote as it comes in to match it against your poll. And then you reweight your poll based on the actual results, because every poll, as you know, involves a lot of speculation on the part of the pollster. How Black will the electorate be? What women, old, young, first-time voters, blah, blah, blah. So you have a lot, you're building in a lot of assumptions, and that's how you can have a poll of 1,000 people in an electorate of 150 million that is predictive to some degree. So once you start to get the real vote in, then you know, okay, we have to reweight this sample so that it reflects the actual electorate. Once you have that, then you can start calling races, right? You can say, okay, I mean, obviously we know 40 of the 50 states in the District of Columbia, we can call now, right? We don't need to work. I'm prepared to project that Donald Trump will win Alabama and Kamala Harris will win California. And then as you move closer to the most narrowly contested states, you focus in on them and you reweight the poll to see if something clearly has happened. So what Decision Desk HQ will do, and by the way, I'm very pleased, my old boss, Bill Salmon, is on with us. He's not on camera this year, but he's on the team this year, helping bird dog what Decision Desk HQ is going to do. So I'll just be sitting in a studio, gnawing my fingernails, wishing that I was in the room helping to make the calls. But my job will be to contextualize, potentially interrogate the data scientists, but to help people understand what's going on. That'll be my job. And since we don't know what kind of election this is, there's three basic buckets of probability that the polls have understated Kamala Harris more than Donald Trump, and that this will be like 2012. She'll get the windage at the end, and she'll win most or all of the swing states, right? It'll be the flop will go in her direction. Or it's like 2016, Donald Trump is more understated and he'll win most or all of the swing states. And then there's option 3, which is the one that everybody's freaked out about, which is that it's like 2000 and the polls are right. And if the polls are right, and this is a vanishingly close election, and we're going to be on Thursday morning looking at Dane County, Wisconsin returns, and 50 million lawsuits have been filed, and the Supreme Court has been asked for emergency injunctive relief, people are, understandably freaked out about that.
Chris, should we get into garbage gates? We have multiple garbage gates.
A fitting end to the high-minded conversations of the 2024 presidential election has been your garbage, no, your garbage.
So on the one hand, we have the comedian who spoke at Madison Square Garden at the Trump rally, Tony, is it Heathcliff?
Hinchcliffe?
Hinchcliffe? I'd never heard of him before, who called Puerto Rico a floating pile of garbage. And on the other hand, we then have Joe Biden coming in hot and calling Trump's supporters garbage. How impactful do you think either of these are likely to be? We have in here, a note that the Trump campaign came in and distanced itself from the Tony Hinchcliffe comments. And Harris's response to Biden's comments have been a little bit different. She just, while other Democrats have not used his name, but said, we would never call supporters of another political candidate garbage. She's been reluctant to distance herself from Biden.
Well, she did the thing. She talked to reporters under the wing of the airplane. I would never do that. I would never denigrate anybody's supporters, and that's not what this is. But yeah, there definitely was a missed opportunity for Kamala Harris to put the wood to Joe Biden and say, absolutely not. I could not disagree more strongly. But let's take it in order. So my first theory is that the self-defeating decision by the Trump campaign to hold this rally in Manhattan, if they would have done the same thing, but done it in Nevada, right? They'd have had Rudy Giuliani and Tucker Carlson talking about Kamala Harris is a Samoan and people making watermelon jokes and this comedian, and if they'd have done this in Reno, it would have made news, but it would have made news the way that other Trump rally stuff makes news, right? That it gets siloed, gets ignored by the right, it gets obsessed over by the left, and it's sort of a shrug. But they brought this freak show to Midtown Manhattan, right? Where we know, I call it the Snowmageddon effect, where we're lazy in the news business and we cover New York and Washington to the exclusion frequently of most of the rest of the country. So basically the Trump campaign came to within a quick Uber ride of all of the major television networks and the biggest newspaper in the country and said, look, I demand that you look at us. And they did. And that was foolish. But then, of course, we have Biden, who is just, what a mess, right?
Well, Trump also rented out what may be the country's most famous arena.
Right, exactly.
Everybody knows Madison Square Garden.
Exactly. It's in Midtown Manhattan. It's the most famous arena in the country. It's right by every major news outlet. So he got what he wanted, which was attention. But then, of course, the attention was bad. And in phase one of this story, and I had to take a screenshot of it. It was so funny on CNN, which was lower third on CNN. Reggaeton superstar Nicky Jam withdraws Trump endorsement is the blaring lower third on CNN.
Will he ever recover?
Yeah, what happens now that Nicky Jam is out? So I can only assume that Shaggy is the next shoe to drop in this collapse. And again, I don't want to take anything away from the power of influencers and the power of blah, 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 blah. But come on, right? So the initial way that this story is focused on is, what about the Puerto Ricans? And immediately everybody becomes an expert on, well, there's this many Puerto Ricans who live in Pennsylvania, and what about these Puerto Ricans and those Puerto Ricans? And could this affect Florida? Da, 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 da. It's like, well, Democrats are going to win 80% of Puerto Rican voters because 80% of Puerto Rican voters live in heavily Democratic places. So there you go. Not that marginal differences don't make a difference in very close elections. The problem with this stuff was not, what does it do with Puerto Rican voters? The problem was, what does this do with white ladies who live in the suburbs and find this stuff yucky, distasteful, and makes them uncomfortable? The people who are most sensitive to racial or ethnic humor, most sensitive about it, tend to be not the people of the race or ethnicity, but the people who are squeamish about hearing it and feeling like they are made to be associated with it, right? So that's the first media error. And then the next most amazing media error is Joe Biden. So they're looking for things for Uncle Joe to do. And they give him this little Zoom meeting with a progressive Latino group where he gets to go out and talk and yell about all of this stuff. And he said, I listened to it. Can we play the clip?
Or Puerto Rico, where I'm in my home state of Delaware, they're good, decent, honorable people. The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters. His demonization is seen as unconscionable, and it's un-American.
Okay, that was not a singular possessive supporters.
It's
right?
not confusing at all when you listen to the clips.
It's not. And then
Beyond that, I mean, what struck me is that I do think that this is what Biden thinks. I think it's what he really believes. And it's just, it really is an Occam's razor situation. I mean, this is the person who said in 2012, they want to put you all back in chains. He has a history of this kind of incendiary rhetoric. And it would be akin to arguing that Trump didn't say X, but said Y, much more appropriate and measured thing. Like, it just doesn't truck.
It does not. It doesn't. It neither trucks nor tracks. The Republicans, of course. Well, first, here's this AP story. AP sources White House altered record of Biden's garbage remarks despite stenographer concerns. So the stenographer who keeps the minutes of the presidential utterances had it one way, and the White House overruled the stenographer and said, no, it was a singular possessive, that his supporters, blah, blah. And it was, so talk about preposterous. And as much as I say that Kamala Harris should have taken this opportunity to put the wood to Joe Biden, if Joe Biden were a different kind of person, well, if he were this kind of person, he wouldn't have run for another term. But if he were a different kind of person, what he would have said would have been, I am sorry. I got overheated. I was so mad about what Donald Trump and his supporters have to say about Puerto Ricans that I lost my temper, and I apologize. That would have been good. But instead, they fake the transcript and they do the kinds of things that Democrats rightly complained about the Trump White House doing. And look, this is not the same as his call with Vladimir Zelensky, but it's the same in principle, right? Which is, we're going to doctor the record. We're going to deceive in order to try to save political face. And that's just a crummy thing to do. And so,
I mean, they're worried he might not go down in history as George Washington if Harris loses.
Yeah. And
he's blamed for queering it at the last minute.
Then there's this, which is Joe Biden like Bill Clinton was in 2016, which is passive aggressively submarining Kamala Harris's chances, right? Is Joe Biden so mad that he got shoved aside that subconsciously or unconsciously he's doing it? I will not get into that kind of psychoanalysis, but this was a real the Kinsley gaffe, right? Accidentally saying what you actually think is one thing, and then compounding it with the cover up. And I know it's cover up, whatever, but the cover up is really a Lulu. Now, what's interesting to me about it, the next iteration is the Republicans are just in heaven, right? They say you're garbage. And I've always believed that the political ramifications of Hillary Clinton's infamous deplorables, basket of deplorables line were overstated. I certainly think that there were people there were a lot of undecided or shaky Republican-leaning voters in 2016, and no doubt that was part of a number of things that brought them in to end up pulling the lever for Trump. I don't doubt that. But what I do doubt is that there were many voters who said, well, I was ready to vote for Hillary Clinton, but she said that, and now I'm out. I don't think that I think it's a good motivator for Republicans, but not a good persuader. And this time I just think they're motivated, right? He's got them. It's this election is not like 2016 or not like 2020. The Republicans are all in for Trump. They're there. They haven't held out. They haven't hemmed and hawed. They've been with him really since New Hampshire, right? The party basically, Nikki Haley continued to get 20% in primaries for a while, but the party basically closed ranks. Nikki Haley herself. So I'm skeptical of the utility of this, but Donald Trump and the Republicans definitely think that the garbage, calling Donald Trump supporters garbage, is a key thing that tips the race. I don't know.
Well, in the same way that Harris and her supporters think the Puerto Rico thing is. I mean, this is true on both sides.
The only difference is, well, the campaigns have two different theories of the electorate. Kamala Harris's campaign, and we'll talk about this here in a minute. Kamala Harris's campaign thinks that this is an election about supercharging female voters, right? They think that this is an election in which women are going to storm the ballot box and they're going to vote against Donald Trump again on abortion, on whatever, and also on being gross, right? That they're going to also say, I don't like the Tucker Carlson stuff. I don't like the insult comic stuff. I don't like it. And that's their theory of the electorate. So for them, they say, yes, Madison Square Garden, Cuckoo Bananas rally, good. Trump's theory of the electorate, the Republicans' theory of the electorate is dudes, we were talking about just before we started recording, they're going to Dearborn, Michigan, the home of the single largest Arab American community in the nation, to pitch those voters. They're trying to mobilize and activate dudes in the largest numbers possible. This is really, a campaign that ends with sisters are doing it for themselves on one side, and on the other side, Donald Trump in a reflective penny riding around in a garbage truck is like boys rule, girls drool. So under the Trump campaign's theory of the election, yes, there are still more unactivated, unmobilized, low propensity dude voters who they can get out. And so, yeah, by their thinking, this is offsetting.
How did you perceive the shtick of Trump driving in the garbage truck to the rally and then speaking in the reflective vest? I thought it was akin to his McDonald's shtick, which was clever, and it made it seem like he was having fun and enjoying himself. And I do think there's something to that at this stage in the race.
That is true. I will say this, though. He looked awful. He looked good as a McDonald's guy, right? He had on his little uniform. He had on his little red tie that he always wears in his big blue suit. And he was like, oh, there's Donald Trump. He didn't look good in let's state the obvious. Reflective orange is not
orange on
right.
Orange.
Yeah, is not right for his. He's not an autumn, and it's the wrong color palette for him. And he looked, and then he wore it the whole time. He didn't put it on. In 2016, he went to West Virginia. He put a miner's helmet on, and the crowd went wild. Right? You've seen the picture of him doing his little Macho Man dance, and he's got the miner's helmet on, and people really loved it. But he didn't wear it for 2 days, right? He didn't wear it for 2 days. So this is just probably my bias about how I think people in public life should dress and look. But I didn't think it was flattering to him. And Democrats, of course, have made a great deal out of his little stagger as he was trying to get in the truck. They have Tim Walz and everybody. They've gone after that in the same way. It's funny how the politics of comparative advantage work. Do you remember when Hillary Clinton rumpled at the 9/11 commemoration ceremony?
Mm-hmm.
And Republicans were like, she's had an aneurysm. She's dead. Hillary Clinton is dead already. We can't possibly da-da-da-da-da. So the Democrats are like, oh, okay, we'll do that. We'll run that playbook. And so they're trying to make a media story out of Trump's little sway and stagger getting into the truck. I don't know. I don't know whether that makes any difference.
I really don't think so. I mean, Trump, the guy seems pretty alive. And look, it's true. People get older. They're like a little less steady on their feet. But he seems pretty vivacious. And overall,
he's spunky.
It worked. It worked for him. And he remains litigious as ever, which brings us to Trump suing CBS News for $10 billion, alleging deceptive doctoring of Harris's 60 Minutes interview.
He's going to win, right? This is going to be this.
Yes, so former
surefire.
President Trump is suing CBS News for $10 billion in damages, stating the network practiced deceptive conduct for the purpose of election interference in its interview with Kamala Harris. Trump attorneys said the complaint comes due to CBS's partisan and unlawful acts, blah, blah, blah. And they argued that the edits were done in an attempt to tip the scales in favor of the Democratic Party as the heated 2024 election, which President Trump is leading, approaches its conclusion. Yeah, I have a feeling this isn't going to go too far.
This could be big. This could be big. He's going to own CBS because they're going to say, a court is going to say, yes, this is illegal to edit your interviews in a way that is politically disadvantageous to someone.
Chris, you had flagged this New York Times piece, why the right thinks Trump is running away with the race.
Yes,
And-
this very interesting, very, very interesting about, so we've talked enough about the polls, right? There's nothing, had a great AEI election watch panel this week with a great Republican pollster, great Democratic pollster. It was really, really good. And Kristen Soldis Anderson, and I did this on the commentary podcast, and I'm blanking on the guy from Heart Research's name. This guy's going to hate me that I can never remember his name, but he's very good. And they made the point, which is nobody's running, the campaigns aren't running polls now. Like the presidential campaigns, I'm sure, have tracking polls constantly. They haven't stopped. You're running for, Dave McCormick doesn't need to run a poll in Pennsylvania anymore because they poll to see how messages are working. They poll to see how news events have shaped the race. They're looking for movement in the polls to see how it's going and to change their messages and their choices based on what they see. That's how the campaigns use polling. How we use polling is not really how it works best. We use polling as who will win. And of course, we know that in this race, like I said at the outset, my assumption is the polls will be wrong, but we don't know by how much and we don't know in which direction. So when you have polls that are close, and I mentioned the example of 2012. 2012, it was a tied race. Obama won by 4. Okay, and people will be mad about it, but it is, I will say the annoying thing, Obama winning by 4 was within the dreaded margin of error of a race that's tied. And this looks like a very close race, and it may be 2000, but it may not be. What's interesting in this piece is that the way in which Republicans and Republican pollsters have, now the way the New York Times says is that it's because Republicans are laying a predicate to steal the election or to try to steal the election again. And in the final stretch of campaign 2020, Republican-aligned pollsters released 15 presidential election polls. In the same period this year, they have released 37. And of those 37, all but 7 had Mr. Trump in the lead. And they see something sinister about it. I see a desire for pollsters to tell people what they want to hear, right? And yes, obviously, the people who want to steal an election or who have nefarious plans to do that, and I'm not minimizing the possibility for real bad news if this is a close election. But I think this is more than that. I think it's just trying to be popular and trying to give Republicans what they want. And if your assumption is, well, the mainstream media polls are biased, so we should combat them with biased polls of our own, right? So that's if you believe, you remember unskew the polls?
Of course.
We got to unskew these polls. The polls are skewed. So if you believe that the polls are rigged, and if you believe the election's rigged, I'm certainly figure you think the polls are rigged. And I think that this is, in the light most favorable to the defendant, a sincere effort to do something different. And in the light less favorable to the defendant is that they just want to they're thirsty. They just want Republicans to like them and say that they're good. And by the way, if Donald Trump wins this election, all of those people will say, and here's one to watch out for. Here's one you can watch out for next week. We were the most accurate pollster, and Atlas Intel, which is just spamming the polling averages this year with a avalanche of polls. We were the most accurate pollster, they will say, because we had the number closest to the final number. Folks, if it's that close, right? If you have the final number and it's 49-48, that's luck. That's not science, right? It's luck, it's not science. And so beware the claims of, quote, the most accurate pollster that you will hear. Harumph.
All right. Up next.
Oh, yeah, this thing. I want to get your take on this. Have you seen the Julia Roberts ad?
No.
So some Democratic super PAC, and I'm sorry, I don't know the name of it. Put that on my list of many things that the information my brain cannot hold at this moment, has an ad, voice of Julia Roberts, and it's two plucky gals, and they're at the polling place, and their husband says,
Oh, I've heard about it.
and their
It's
husband
like your
said,
husband doesn't have to know.
yeah. And they wink at each other like, yeah, okay, I did whatever. Now, there's the funny.
I'm a naughty girl.
I'm a naughty girl, right? So we've got the boys in their big trucks, and over here we've got naughty girls. And so there's the media part of this story, which is the psychotic response. Charlie Kirk, Newt Gingrich, others who are like, how dare you undermine your husband? How dare you not honor the demands of your husband and how you vote? I'm like, guys, calm down. Calm yourselves. So there's that part of it. But then there's this part of it, which I promised we'd get to later, and here we are, which is the Harris campaign. So the quote unquote gender gap. So as I've said before, there isn't really a gender gap so much as there's a marriage gap. Single women are Democratic, married women are Republican. Donald Trump won white women both times in the previous two elections. The Democratic theory of the race is that they're going to run up the score. And of course, if you're going to pick one demographic group in the entire nation, white women if you're sorting by gender and ethnicity, white women are the single largest voting bloc in the country. And they're more Republican than Democrat, like not 2-1, but pretty close. And if you can shave just a few points off of that number, and they're very high propensity voters, generally speaking, more so than men. If you can shave just a couple points off of the Republicans' lead with white women, you do a world of good. So Donald Trump, he had this riff in Wisconsin. My people told me 4 weeks ago, I was saying, no, I want to protect the people. I want to protect the women of our country. I want to protect the women. Trump said, sir, and this is where he does the thing where they all call him sir. One of his standard riffs. It's the generals or it's campaign advisors or whatever. Sir, please don't say that. Why? They say, we think it's very inappropriate for you to say. I said, why? I'm president. I want to protect the women of our country. The crowd cheered. They said, sir, I just think it's inappropriate for you to say. I pay these guys a lot of money. Can you believe it? Trump continued. I said, well, I'm going to do it. Whether the women like it or not, I'm going to protect them. And the Harris campaign, which I'm sure just live streams everything Trump says, was like, got it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for doing that. And so we really are closing this campaign with, and I'm frankly surprised that it has taken this long, but we're closing this campaign with the battle of the sexes. And the Clinton-Trump campaign got to be a battle of the sexes much earlier because Hillary Clinton was, to say the least, inelegant in trying to exploit those issues early on. I'm with her, all that garbage, no pun intended. But this time, this is where we're closing, right? We were having a different discussion. Now we're having a boys versus girls discussion.
Yeah, look, Trump's line here, not great. Probably not poll tested and approved, but not the worst thing he could have said. I think it's like in the realm of the Hinchcliffe joke. But if you were talking about a message to resonate with women, I don't think you would have landed on, I'm going to protect them whether they like it or not.
Whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
I'm coming
Joe,
for you.
I don't think that's where we would have landed.
I'm Batman. I'm coming for you.
No.
And Harris's closing argument in her rally in Washington, D.C., and we should note, part of the reason Joe Biden's comments were so idiotic was, what was her closing message? Hey, Republicans, I'm cool. I swear I'm cool. I will behave, and you can't afford another January 6th. I will not be radical. You know what we haven't heard in a long time? It's been many days since anybody said filibuster. Nobody's mentioned the filibuster on the Democratic side of late, and they're trying hard to send the message to Republicans that she'll be okay. She's not dangerous, and it's a hard sale for her to make, because that's what Joe Biden said and then failed to deliver on in the opening half of his presidency. And so Biden coming out and making those remarks undercut everything that she didn't entirely undercut it, but it ran right against everything that she had said.
Chris, we would be remiss if we did not talk about the absolute meltdown occurring at the Washington Post.
Wow.
After Jeff Bezos pumped the brakes on publishing an endorsement of Kamala Harris, and the opinion section, which would have been published by the paper's editorial page, is furious. So Bezos himself published a piece in the paper this week, and it was quite good, I thought. The headline is "The Hard Truth: Americans Don't Trust the News Media." And he writes that presidential endorsements do nothing to tip the scales of an election. No undecided voters in Pennsylvania are going to say, "I'm going with newspaper A's endorsement." None. What presidential endorsements actually do is create a perception of bias, a perception of non-independence. Ending them is a principled decision, and it's the right one. And I want to read another part of it where he says, "Our profession is now the least trusted of all. Something we are doing is clearly not working. Let me give you an analogy. Voting machines must meet two requirements. They must count the vote accurately, and people must believe they count the vote accurately. The second requirement is distinct from and just as important as the first. Likewise with newspapers, we must be accurate and we must be believed to be accurate. It's a bitter pill to swallow, but we are failing on the second requirement. Most people believe the media is biased." And he says, anyone who doesn't see this is paying scant attention to reality, and those who fight reality lose. Reality is an undefeated champion.
Would that it were so, Mr. Bezos. Would that it were so. Yeah, this was good, and it was well argued, and I'm sure that you and the great Christine Rosen wrestled with these questions last week. But newspaper endorsements were important when newspapers were more partisan than ideological, which is to say, I can remember in West Virginia that the newspaper would print a slate of endorsements for voters to take with them to the polls, because the paper was partisan, right? There was a Republican paper and there was a Democratic paper. And for nonpartisan elections, courts or whatever, right? The mayor of whatever, here's how the party wants you to vote. And newspaper endorsements, when newspapers were partisan, were useful. Now, the opinion sections of newspapers are ideological more than they are partisan, which is to say, they have a viewpoint that they are mostly trying to push in the party of their choice. They're sub-partisan. So they are trying to foster a certain point of view, not in both parties. The Washington Post isn't really talking to, the Washington Post editorial page isn't really talking to very many Republicans. George Will, who, by the way, is celebrating 50 years at the Washington Post, the indispensable George Will. So yes, you have George Will and you have some conservative columnists, but mostly who are they writing for? They're writing for a sort of center-left kind of Democrat and trying to have influence with them. New York Times has a similar but slightly more progressive point of view from their editorial page, and National Review is trying to influence Republicans. And it's ideological, not partisan. It's subpartisan. So what's the point of a newspaper endorsing a candidate in a situation like that? What is the power that it is lending to it? Is none, right? No one wonders who the Washington Post editorial board is voting for. The Wall Street Journal doesn't do endorsements, but they wrote strongly as they could in favor of why they have been making the argument for many months about why Donald Trump is the best but imperfect option in this election. And maybe those are persuasive, maybe they're not, but endorsements are, they are relics of a bygone era.
Well, I actually wanted to focus on something else, which, we at the Free Beacon obtained an audio recording of an approximately 90-minute meeting that the opinion staff held
Oh,
with
no.
David Shipley, the opinion editor, where Shipley blamed Bezos for this decision and essentially said, this is like a bomb that went off and we were all left to pick up the pieces. And then the opinion staff just unloads on him and complains that Bezos is destroying the paper's reputation as an independent journalistic
Oh,
organization.
man.
And everybody says how terrible it would be if Trump is elected again. And what struck me in hearing all of this is that they are appalled that the editor of a that the owner of a newspaper would exercise any sort of control over the newspaper. And they viewed it as entirely inappropriate for Bezos in his capacity as owner to say, we're not going to do this. And my understanding is that Bezos does not want a woke newspaper. And another thing we were going to talk about here is that 250,000 subscribers have canceled their subscriptions over this. And I suspect actually that Bezos and some others at the Post don't really care, because these are the sorts of people, if they actually do want to expand their market share, they don't really need those people. They need to reach the center right. And the people who would cancel their subscriptions over this, are a problematic sort of audience to have.
Yeah, certainly the audience capture deal, where if your business model is that you're going to, and I wrote about this in my book, The Washington Post was one of the best examples of this. I believe the phrase that the journalism academic used was optimizing for anger. So the way the Washington Post tried to catch up with the New York Times when the New York Times started blowing it out of the water with digital subscriptions was they leaned in on clickbait. They leaned in on rage, right? And giving people I guess I'll put it this way, like saying to people, oh, you think MSNBC's too squishy about these things? Well, come over here to the Young Turks on streaming, and we're giving it to you hardcore. We're giving you the uncut blow over here. And so the Washington Post did optimize for anger better, and they did catch up, not all the way, but they caught up some with the New York Times in tapping into a harder, angrier audience. And then they plateaued, and they couldn't. And basically the story that we've been telling about the Washington Post now on this podcast for 2 years is they've changed this, they've changed that, they've had newsroom roars, they hired Taylor Lorenz, they fired Taylor Lorenz, they've gone through all of these things to try to get it figured out. But what they're really living in the shadow of is a decision that they made in 2017 to lean in and get thirsty for angry clicks.
So the question I'm left with is, if Bezos does not want an ideologically left woke paper, how is he actually going to change that without firing a lot of people? And it's the same sort of question that I was asking about Chris Licht at CNN, who came in and said, we're not going to be a left-wing cable news network. We're going to be right down the middle. And he fired a few people, but he didn't engage in mass firings. And he was out within a year.
Well, maybe Jeff Bezos is an ink-stained Wretches listener. Maybe we can explain this all by the fact that Jeff Bezos loves the Wretches. Because what have I been saying this whole time, which is if you're rich and you want to have a newspaper, great. If you're already losing money on it, be ready to lose enough money to have a newspaper that you like. Be prepared to lose enough money to have a great newspaper. And whereas Chris Licht was a hireling, this is Jeff Bezos' newspaper. If he wants to lose, I don't know what he loses a year on the Washington Post, but triple it. Let it rock. Make something that you really like. Make something that you think lines up with who you want to be, and give it time. Chris Licht was never going to have time at CNN. He was never going to have time, because we've seen it happen a bunch of times at CNN, which is, we're going to move away from this. We're going to remember when they were going to do killer whale movies. We're going to actually move away from breaking news coverage, and we're going to focus on killer whales. And they were like, nah, we're not going to do that. We can't take the beating, because they have shareholders and corporate overlords who are not going to let them do that. Jeff Bezos is the corporate overlord. And if he wants to have a paper that he likes, he can afford to do. If Elon Musk can afford to allow Twitter's market value to be garbagified, Jeff Bezos can take the much smaller investment in making the Washington Post back into a great newspaper.
Yep. Chris, that brings us to our style section.
We got style. We got Halloween style.
This made me so happy because I've been a longtime fan of this candy. The Wall Street Journal reports America's newest hit candy is gummy, crunchy, and printing money. Nerds Gummy Clusters are everywhere this Halloween. They were born from years of geeky research and executives going with their gut. These things are so good. So the Journal writes, the first time consumers heard about it, they had no idea what to make of it. And the first time they tasted it, the peculiar confection didn't leave much more of an impression. So there was nothing to suggest Nerds Gummy Clusters would be a success. And now Americans can't stop eating them. It's one of the biggest hits in the candy aisle this Halloween, and the unlikeliest. Only 6 years ago, all of Nerds had less than 50 million in sales. This year, Nerds Gummy Clusters alone has already generated more than 500 million.
Dang on.
These things are so good.
Did these come after Nerds Rope? I assume first there was Nerds Rope, and then there were Nerds Gummy Clusters. Well, I like the interplay of textures, the crunch, the chew. Nerds, the problem with Nerds always, Nerds were, I'm of the vintage that Nerds were the hot candy when I was in probably, I don't know, middle school, something. They were new. It was a big deal. And they had Nerds. They had 2 different flavors in the box. You could have strawberry on this side and lemon on that side or whatever. But since they're just candy grit, they're just sugar grit. They weren't satisfying. They were tasty, but not satisfying. These are satisfying. Now, my question for you is, I assume that where you live is a trick-or-treater hot zone, right? Is that true?
No, we actually went to Capitol Hill, where there's sort of more kids. The houses are closer together. So
you were one of the people besetting my neighborhood last night?
Yeah.
You people are the worst.
That was awesome.
You people are the worst. Capitol Hill, I dropped my youngest man-child off at a Halloween party where what did your daughter dress as?
She was Blippi from the YouTube series, and I was Mika, who's Blippi's like sidekick.
I don't know who any of those people are.
Yeah, you wouldn't unless you have a toddler.
But I bet she was adorable. I feel very confident that she was very adorable. My eldest man-child is beyond dressing. His last Halloween costume, until he becomes an adult Halloween costume wearer, was as a Knights Templar with actual chainmail. So a Knight Templar with actual chainmail. So that was a good one for him to go out on a few years ago. But he's out of the business. My youngest man-child is now 14 and in the I want to still go trick-or-treating, but I don't want to say that I want to go trick-or-treating. So I took him to a Halloween party one of his classmates had in Alexandria, and he was dressed as a Savannah Bananas banana. Do you know about the Savannah Bananas?
Yeah.
So he put on a banana costume and then put a Savannah Bananas jersey on top of the banana costume. So he was a Savannah Bananas banana.
That's a good one.
If you were to give out candy, what candy would you give out? What do you think the best candy to give or receive is?
Oh, Reese's Take 5.
I mean, that's a great
Kinda like
candy bar.
original, delicious, novel.
I think part of me says, so I used to give out, I don't, living on Capitol Hill, I hide from you people, but because it's just too much. But when living in suburbia, I was Heath bars, full-size Heath bars.
Oh, that's good.
And
Also sort of off the beaten path.
yeah, and Butterfingers for sure. And my favorite old person candy, an underappreciated candy, the 100 grand bar.
It's 1,000 grand.
Is it 1,000 grand now?
Yeah.
So the inflation. So thanks, Joe Biden.
Well, wait.
Thanks, Joe Biden.
Maybe
It's
you're
a-
right.
It's $1 million now.
You're right. It's 100 grand.
Yeah.
I totally agree. Those things are delicious.
I'm in the caramel chocolate space. I like Rolos.
Those things are really, yes. Rolos also sleeper candy.
And let me ask you this follow-up question, which is, what do you think that the presidential and vice presidential candidates, if they were giving out candy, what would they give out?
Trump would be like king size something.
King size Trump chocolate bars with his face
King
on
size.
them. Yeah, definitely king
Harris.
size.
Would be like, some kind of sugar-free health,
Like Joyride.
something not fun. Like
Beet
Earth,
sugar.
Earth Mother yum
Yeah.
lollipop.
I can see like a stevia and beet sugar sweetened candy. So we'll say Joyride for her. JD Vance.
Oh, no idea.
One that I know that got me thinking about this was Tim Waltz is definitely Milk Duds. Definitely Milk Duds. I think old JD Vance would have given out something hip and cool and old fashioned. Current JD Vance, I guess, would give out something that was flavored with liberal tears.
Why is Walls Milk Duds?
Because they're old fashioned. They're not great, but they're okay. And when you get the little box, there's 3 of them in there, right?
Yeah.
You get the can. You're like, oh, you get it, and it's like, oh, there's
They're
2
really
Milk Duds in
good
here.
when it's like mixed with a bunch of other things.
Well, sure. I mean, I'm not here. I come to speak no ill of the Milk Dud, but the Milk Dud as a Halloween candy it's not buns, but it is a little mid because the small number of duds that you get per box.
There need to be more.
Yeah, I mean, sugar babies, you got a problem because they're going to get crushed up in that little bag, and you're going to lose the smooth coating.
You're such an expert.
Ask a fat guy, right?
Well,
you want to know? Ask a fat guy.
The worst candy is a Milky Way. I'm not moving off that.
You're still wrong. You're just wrong.
All right, Chris. There's another style section item that we missed that I wanted to throw in, which is that see in the New York Post that McDonald's is bringing back spicy chicken nuggets.
Okay.
Says the Golden Arches are bringing back a fan favorite menu item, and customers are loving it so much they want it to be permanent.
Well, I'm mad at McDonald's, so
Why?
because there's no McRib.
Okay, I'm not mad about that.
I'm mad.
Fast food chain's beloved spicy chicken nuggets will be returning once again, according to food blogger at Marky Devo. Spicy chicken nuggets are a twist on the classic, breaded in a crispy tempura coating and spiced with a blend of cayenne and chili pepper. All right, so they're going to be available starting November 4th, and they're already showing up on the website.
McRib or nothing. I'm furious, and the McRib has shown up in other countries and in a couple of very isolated locations in the United States.
They got the message from, their fans were not.
It's a mistake. All I can say, McDonald's, you're making a mistake. You're making a mistake. I like to. When I eat carbs and I'm looking forward to after the election when I break my carbohydrate fast. McRib is part of my story, and McDonald's is denying. I may sue. I may get Trump's lawyer, who's suing CBS for $10 billion, to file an additional $10 billion lawsuit against McDonald's for ruining my birthday.
All right, Chris, that brings us to our obsessions, where we break down the stories that we can't get out of our heads. Mine is kind of lame. I'm sorry. The New York Times had this article about I have long wanted an Aura ring, which are these rings you can put on your finger, and you're supposed to tell you all about your sleep and
Okay.
your steps and your heart rate. And, it's like computer you can wear on your finger. And the Times headline is, "This ring on your finger tracks your sleep. Is it worth the splurge?" The $350 Aura Ring 4 looks sleek and cool, and it may be useful for data-hungry enthusiasts, but it failed this sleep-deprived patient. And this Times piece basically says that the data is crap. And I'm grateful for this piece because I guess I don't need an Aura Ring.
I mean, how much, maybe you know more and then you change your behavior, but it feels kind of anxiety inducing.
It is a little bit, but I've heard a lot of people tell me that they started to be able to see the impact of drinking on their sleep or other things like that, and that it like motivated them to change their habits.
Well, so you're not going to get one.
I'm not getting one based on this.
All right.
Because it says that the data misses periods when you are sleeping and that it's just not that reliable.
Look at the New York Times helping you live a better life and save $350.
Yeah.
My obsession is this, that accepting results of elections is hard. Accepting the blame for why you lost an election is harder. So there's two posts or two pieces that speak to this that I've included here. One is the New York Post still talking about Hunter Biden's laptop. And this is not to say that the criticism of Twitter for taking down the New York Post story is not well placed, and not that the New York Post doesn't have every right to complain about what Twitter did on October 14th, 2020. And not to say that the Senate hearings that were held the next week into this were not appropriately called, not to say that any of that is forbidden or wrong. With it is a article from Slate about Jill Stein. Headline, "How freaked out should I be really about Jill Stein? The election looks so close that it seems like just about anything could tip it." This is hearkening back not 4 years, but 8 years to the belief among Democrats, including Hillary Clinton, that Jill Stein cost her the election. And if you'll recall, there was a lot of talk about Russian influencers and blah, 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 blah. Hillary Clinton did not lose the 2016 election because of Jill Stein. Donald Trump did not lose the 2020 election because Twitter temporarily banned a story about Hunter Biden. In fact, the Hunter Biden story worked to Republicans' favor substantially because of the same thing as the garbage comment that Biden made, which is it was something for them to talk about, right? The outrage over the liberal media for 2 weeks, more than 2 weeks prior to the election, was something for them to talk about that worked in their favor. When you lose a close election, it's very tempting to say, well, see, it was this one thing. It was this one thing. Nobody who voted for Jill Stein was like, I would have voted for Hillary Clinton if only Jill Stein had not been on the ballot. I was ready to vote for Hillary Clinton. I was excited to vote for Hillary Clinton, but just had to vote for Jill Stein. No, the votes for Jill Stein were votes against Hillary Clinton. Some of those people would have voted for Donald Trump. Some of those people would have written in their dog Mavis. Some of those people would have done whatever. But Hillary Clinton lost Michigan because she was a terrible candidate who ran a terrible campaign. And even if you would have flipped all those Jill Stein votes to Hillary Clinton, she still would have lost the election because in other states, the Democrat, just for people's frame of reference on election night, Democrat can only afford to lose one of the blue wall states. She was going to lose one of those. So this is just a note to say, accepting results is important and it's hard, but you also have to be able to accept blame. Donald Trump lost the 2020 election because he acted like a maniac about COVID. And it was wild and weird and cataclysmic. And that's why he lost the election. And you don't need other theories to do it.
Okay. All right. That brings us to our favorite items of the week, where I am forced to say something nice. But Chris, take us away first.
Do you read John McWhorter?
Yes.
I love John McWhorter. He's a linguist. writes for the New York Times. He wrote a great book called, was it Woke Racism? And really good. He's just really good. He's a man of the left, but he is a very clear thinking, very good dude. And he has this beautiful piece where he just analyzes Donald Trump's rhetoric of the closing weeks of the campaign. And he comes to an interesting conclusion, which is that it's not that Donald Trump has secret master plan, that Donald Trump is a bored person who inflates his language preposterously because he's bored and he's trying to make things more interesting for himself and others by adding in all of this extra verbiage. And he concludes this way: my fear is that Trump in office would be perfectly and horrifically sane and more or less stay the way that his whole term. What many see as late crazy is just him champing at the bit to get into office. And it was a good, interesting, smart piece.
Chris, my favorite item was this adorable Wall Street Journal piece. What more could you need with all this crazy election stuff going on around us, about the little baby pygmy hippo in a Thai zoo that has gone viral? From internet sensation to overexposed child star, Mudang fans can't get enough. The baby pygmy hippo has overtaken social media feeds and turned a Thai zoo into an influencer destination. But some worry it's all too much.
Too much.
So this little adorable hippo is less than 4 months old. We'll put the article in our newsletter.
It's a very good looking hippo.
People are loving watching videos of her and her taking baths. The perpetually moist pink and gray hippo, first seen in videos trotting adorably around her pen in a Thai zoo, has drawn nearly $500,000 in donations at the Khao Q Open Zoo. Ticket sales have skyrocketed, and the zoo has introduced Mudang merchandise to capitalize on the moment. The question now is, how long can it last? And it gets into people expressing concern that she's overexposed. The zoo is treating Mudang as a spectacle, not an autonomous being with her own needs and rights, said Liz Cabrera Holt, senior campaigns manager with the U.S. branch of the animal advocacy group World Animal Protection. People
Mudang
know
loves it.
on some level, seeing this little hippo on concrete in a country so far from her natural home, that there might be something wrong with that. So only between 2,000 and 2,500 of these little guys exist all over the world. And the article also has pictures of all of the tourists flocking to this zoo to see this little hippo. So it's a cute article.
Very cute. Very
Yes.
cute. Way to go, Mudang.
That is all the time we have for the news about the news. If you have a story you want us to talk about, email us at wretches@nebulouspodcasts.com and sign up for our newsletter at nebulouspodcasts.com. This has been Ink Stained Wretches from Nebulous Media, produced by Colin Chicola. Find us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Wretches.